So welcome to our today's class. As you see on the slide, that is the title of today's class is Comparative Literature Identities in the Post-Colonial World. We had another class based on the same topic previously. We had been discussing about the African post-colonial writer and the African writers who contributed to comparative literature. We have discussed in details in the previous classes. Today, we will be discussing more about the post-colonial identities regarding the comparative literature. And also, we have learned that the post-colonial comparative literature started a journey for the cause of the national identities. Whenever comparing literature will come in discussion, naturally, we will be thinking about the national identity, literary identity, and the identity of the cultural heritage and the literary heritage. In this regard, we will be discussing about the post-colonial writers who are playing important role as the comparatist of their literature. In this regard, we know that post-colonialism, this is a term, and this term is related to another term, that is anti-colonialism. So post-colonialism, that means after the colony, what will be happening to the countries who were once upon the colony of the colonizers, colonizer. They are also called colonized country. And also there is an attitude. Attitude means post-colonialism will be asking the question about the hegemony or dominant of the literature, of the culture of the colonized countries. Just for an example, we had been a colony of Britain, and for this reason, post-colonial approach will be asking question about the dominant British culture. Another term is related, that is anti-colonialism, opposite to colonial power or colonial role. These two terms in related, but the post-colonialism and anti-colonialism, the both terms ask question about the dominant colonized culture, the dominant culture who dominated the culture of the colonies once upon a time. And of particular importance in furthering post-colonial theory has been the growth of literature produced in bilingual or multilingual mixed race societies since 1950s. So from 1950 decades, the colonies had been getting independence, and for this reason there was a juxtaposition of two languages or more languages, and if it is the comparison between two languages, that is called multilingual comparison. And if it discusses the more than two languages or more than one languages, that can also be called multilingual context. And also we see the mixed race societies. Race culture will also be dealing with the idea of post-colonialism and anti-colonialism. In this regard, Ascopt et al. Feel that the Caribbean has been the crucial of the most extensive and challenging postmodern theory. Of comparable importance has been the developing consciousness of bilingual communities in Canada and the United States. Firsthand, the Caribbean countries, they had a significant identity. Not only the Caribbean countries, but also the people of other linguistic and cultural background who have been living in Canada and United States, they have also come in discussion. In one hand, we see Caribbean countries, they have their distinctive culture, language, and others, and literature as well. In the same way, we see the people living in Canada and USA, they don't have the different geographical boundary. However, their linguistic background is different. Their culture is different. As we see that most people use English language as their first language or the second language in Canada and USA, but there are some difference. But in this regard, this writer, Escopt et al., that means Escopt and all other writers, they claim that the Caribbean case is different because in case of Caribbean language, Caribbean culture, the Caribbean countries will have distinctive geographical boundary, political boundary. However, the people living in Canada and USA, they don't have the geographical boundary. Still, they have different language and different culture and different literature as well. And this idea, that means the people living in USA and Canada came in discussion for one kind of movement that is called Chicano movement, Chicano movement in USA. And especially the Chicano literature in particular has powerful implication for both North and South American culture. So this Chicano literature and this Chicano culture will have particular impact in both North and South American culture. So how we can make difference between Caribbean culture and Chicanos culture? The history of the Caribbean from the time of Columbus' first arrival has been a history of genocide, brutal slave trading, economic exploitation, poverty, and racism. These issues concerned with Caribbean. Once the native population of the Caribbean countries, they were all over there in the Caribbean countries, but they were wiped out. And black slaves were shipped over like cattle to work on the plantation. The black people living in the Caribbean countries, they had been shipped like cattle to work in the plantation program or the plantation activities done by the European colonial power or the European colonial people living in USA, Canada, in these countries. Even after the abolition of slavery was removed, still there was a tendency that the people of the Caribbean countries were shipped just like a cattle to work on the plantation, to support the colonizer, to support plantation work and some other farm work done in USA, which happened at very different points across the Caribbean as a whole. The exploitation of poor immigrant workers from Asia continued. The history of the Chicanos, on the contrary. So we see the history of Caribbean people. In this regard, we can have a quick look to the Caribbean countries. That is, in the map you see, that is, the Caribbean is a group of islands in the Caribbean Sea to the east of North America, simply known to many as Paradise. These are the Caribbean countries and includes, that means Antigua, Barbuda, Bahamas, Barbados, Cuba, Dominica, Dominican Republic, Grenada, Haiti, Jamaica, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Trinidad and Tobago. These 13 countries are major, but there are more countries in this list. That is, these are the list of the 26 Caribbean countries, though these countries are under the British rule. At present, the British colonial, the British do not call them the colony. They call that British overseas territories. So look here, these are the British overseas territories: Constituent Kingdom, Netherlands, okay, and also Netherlands, France, Venezuela, also United States. This country got the power of these islands we see in the Caribbean countries. And also this sea, this ocean, these islands are surrounded by the ocean. So they are very beautiful to look at. So these are the tourist location of the tourists all over the people, all over the world. So these are the Caribbean countries. And we have also discussed about the Chicano. Who are the Chicano? Chicano are the native of America. They live in America, but they are descendant from Mexico.
Hello.
Sorry for the interruption. Uh, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we had been discussing about the background of Chicano. Okay, Chicano, they live in USA, but they are descended from Mexico, who live in the United States. The term became widely used during the Chicano movement in 1960 decades by many Mexican American to express a political stance founded on pride, on a shared cultural, ethnic, and community identity. That means the people live in USA, they are the citizen in USA, but they are from Mexico. So that, and also for their political, linguistics, and cultural identity, there was a movement that occurred in USA, and that movement is called Chicano movement. And we have been discussing the difference between Caribbean literature and the Chicano literature. The Chicano literature especially discusses the identity, discrimination, and the culture with an emphasis on validating Mexican American culture, or Chicano culture in the United States. And it is often associated with the social cultural claim of the Chicano movement. And they live in USA, but they are from Mexico, and they speak Spanish and also English as well. They have their cultural identity, they have their linguistics identity. And for this reason, for getting individual or different identity in USA, there was a movement in USA in 1960 that is called Chicano movement. And this movement is Chicano movement. The Chicano movement during the civil rights consisted of three major goals, which were rights for the farm workers, restoration of land, and education reform. So Chicano literature and Chicano culture came in discussion for the movement of um, Chicano movement that happened in 1960 decades in USA. The problem is that in case of Caribbean, they have distinctive geographical boundary, but in case of Chicano literature and culture, they have different language, they have different culture, they have different ethnic background, but they don't have distinctive geographical location or the boundary. They live in USA. They speak both Spanish and English. However, they have the distinctive culture. This is the crucial difference between Caribbean and the um, Chicano literature or culture. So if we speak about the Chicano, they live in the same country, that means the USA, actually they speaks about the disposition, racism, and exploitation. And there are many similarities, as the early member of the Chicano civil rights movement point out, between the treatment of native Hispanic in the United States and the treatment of the Native American. So Native American and Hispanic mean they speak Spanish language and they are descended from Spain. So there is a difference between Native American who are who speak English, but they are from the Aboriginal American people, and they are also the citizen of America. In the same way, the people came from Spain, they speak Spanish, they are also the citizen of America. However, there is a issue of racism. There is a issue of exploitation because these people mainly work on several factories. And when the Spanish people had been working in the factories, they had been exploited by the Native American. And for this reason, it is claimed that the Chicano culture is the history of racism and exploitation. In this regard, the common link between Chicano and the Chicanos, sorry, and the population of the Caribbean is their cultural and racial hybridization. Hybridization, that means some culture will be mixed with another culture. In case of Caribbean, the Caribbean people had been ruled by the British or European people, so their culture was mixed with British culture. In the same way, Chicanos had been ruled in USA by the American native people who are white in color, and for this reason there is also a mixing of both culture, Spanish culture or Mexican culture with American culture. So in both terms we see the hybridization of culture. And in this regard, this is a point that has been repeatedly stressed by such prominent writers as Wilson Harridge, Edward Barthwaite, George Lemming, Thomas Riveri, Rodolfo Anwea, or Alurista, recognizing that there is no single identity, no common ancestral line, but rather a plethora of races, of cultures, means that the Caribbean or Chicano concept of history is a flexible one. As George Lemming puts it in The Pleasures of Exile in 1960, he is a descendant both from colonizer and colonized. So this writer also does claim the same issue, that Chicano and the Caribbean, their culture has been hybridized with the mixing with European culture. That issue is claimed by uh, George Lemming. He said that we are the descendant of both colonial people and the colonized. So both colonizer and colonized. We have this kind of heritage that is mixed cultural origin or background or cultural similarity. That means we are from both colonizer and colonized. I am reading, that means, for I am a direct descendant of slave. It is claimed by George Lemming. Too near to the actual enterprise to believe that it echoes are over with the reign of emancipation. Moreover, I am a direct descendant of Prospero. You have heard the name of Prospero. That means Prospero is the
Tempester character.
right, and Prospero. So he said that I am a descendant of Prospero. In which way? That Prospero had the colonizer in that island. So George Lemming said that I am a descendant of Prospero, working in the same temple of endeavor and using his legacy of language not to curse our meeting, but to push it further. reminding the descendant of both sides and what's done is done and can only be seen as soil from which other gifts, the same gifts enjoyed with different meanings, may grow towards the future which is colonized by our acts at this moment, but this must always remain open. So George Lemming claimed that I possess both the culture of colonized and the colonizer because I am a descendant of slave. My skin color is black. However, my um, uh, previous year, they are also colonized by the colonizer. So I get bondage with both the servant, that means the Caliban, and also the Prospero. This is George Lemming. He is from Barbados. And George Lemming is a Bajan novelist, essayist, and poet, and an important figure in Caribbean literature who first won critical acclaim with his debut novel In the Castle of My Skin. So George Lemming claimed that actually the same claim, that means the Caribbean culture is a hybridized culture. Same claim is done by George Lemming that am a I am the descendant both of colonizer and the colonized. Another writer, that is Rodolfo Gonzalez, explores the similar dilemma in his long poem, I Am Jocain, published like so many Chicano texts in both English and Spanish. We have been discussing about Caribbean literature and Chicano literature. So previous one, the Barbados, that means the Caribbean literature. This writer claimed that I am the descendant of both colonizer and colonized. So Rodolfo speaks about the Chicano literature, Chicano text in both English and Spanish. So Rodolfo, actually this is Rodolfo, Mexican American boxer, poet, and political activist. And he convened his first ever Chicano Youth Conference in March 1969, which was attended by many future Chicano activists and artists. The conference also promulgated the plan Spiritual de Altijan, a manifesto demanding self-determination for Chicanos. Here, he is a boxer and next time a poet. As the early figure of the movement for the equal rights of the Mexican American, he is often considered one of the founder of the Chicano movement. We have also talked about the Chicano movement. Chicano movement is for the movement that the Mexican American brought in 1960s in America for their rights, civil rights. So Rodolfo, he says that uh, it is a mirror of our greatness and our weakness, a call to action as a total people emerging from the glorious history, traveling through social pain and conflicts, confessing our weaknesses while we shout about our strength, culminating into one, the psychological wounds, cultural genocide, social castration, nobility, courage, and determination, and the fortitude to move on to make new history for an ancient people dancing on a modern stage. That means, again, Rodolfo also claimed the same claim of hybridization. He said that in one way, our culture has been genocided. Our social structure has been castrated for the presence of American in this area. We are minority people. We are descendant of Mexico, but we speak both English and Spanish. However, we are got assimilated with the American culture. So our culture is a hybridized one. So both Lemming and Gonzalo, in their different ways, are seeking to come to terms with the history of their people and to move forward into the future. Spaniard and Indian, black slave and white colonizer, are the ancestor of the new mixed races in the present. And there is no sense of polarization, neither recognition of the multifaceted nature of Chicano or Caribbean culture. So we see that in case of Chicano culture, and of course in case of the Caribbean culture, both culture are hybridized for the presence of America, for the European colonial power. In this regard, some idea come forward, especially the conquistador, and also uh, not only the European people had been living in this area, that means America and also the Caribbean countries, some other civilization came in this area to rule the country. What are the area? These are the Maya empires. We have heard the name of the Maya civilization, the longest, the biggest and long-term civilization in this area, and also Aztec civilization. So here there is a claim: I am Aztec prince and Christian Christ. I shall endure. I shall endure. So here there is an indication. So what is the conquistador? Conquistador was the knights, soldiers, and explorers of the Spanish and the Portuguese Empire. During the age of discovery, conquistadors sailed beyond Europe to the Americas, Oceania, Africa, Asia, conquering territory and opening trade routes. It means that not only the European people, the Spanish and the Portuguese sailors, they also spread it in this area, and they ruled this area for a long time as well, just like the European people. And also some other civilization came in this area, that is the Aztec, where a pre-Columbian Mesoamerican people of the central Mexico in 14th, 15th, and 16th century. Actually, Mesoamerican means literally meaning Middle America in Greek actually. Okay. And Middle America often refers to a larger area in the Americas, but it has also previously been used more narrowly to refer Mesoamerica. Here, Aztec, they were the pre-Columbian Mesoamerican people of the central Mexico in the 4th, 10th, 15th, and 16th centuries. They called themselves Mexica. The capital of the Aztec Empire was uh, Tenochtitlan. During the empire, the city was built as a raised island in the Lake Texcoco. So the Aztec civilization. So we have seen conquistador. They came from Spain and Portugal. Apart from that, these people, that means the Aztec civilization, they also came in this area. And also there another civilization came in this area, that is the Maya civilization. The vast area were covered by the Maya civilization. The Maya are probably the best known, the classical civilization of Mesoamerica, originating in the Yucatan around 2600 BC. They rose to prominence around AD 250 in the present-day southern Mexico, Guatemala, northern Belize, and western Honduras. Most famously, the Maya of the southern lowland region reached their peak during the classical period of Maya civilization and built the great stone cities and monuments that have fascinated explorers and scholars of this region. Actually, we see the great stonework all over this in this continent. These are done by the Maya civilization. So the European came later. Before European people in this area were visited and ruled by this civilization, Maya civilization, Aztec civilization, and also the people, the Spanish and the Portuguese. So in this regard, the Chicano literature and the Chicano culture goes back to American culture. And in 1960 decades, for the movement for the civil rights movements, the Chicano literature and culture came forward, though they are living in the same geographical area in USA. Another Joaquin American poet. Joaquin is an American slam poet and teacher. In 2004, Nato Joe completed his in the National Poetry Slam as a part of the Dallas Poetry Slam team, which placed third. He also appeared to the HBO's Dale Poetry in 2005. So it is also another American poet. He also. So in this area, what we are discussing, that this civilization also came in this area. So when we speak about the Chicano literature and culture, their culture and culture and linguistic heritage goes back more than the European culture in America. What will unite Chicanos? We also Gonzalez presents Chicanos with an uncomfortable picture of centuries of compromise and coalition that stands alongside the other picture of the ancestors as victim of the oppression and the enslavement. He notes with some bitterness that in the history of Chicanos is stained with blood, much of it shed for the same society that discriminates against them. So Gonzalez, they speaks about the people of the Chicano people, that means the Mexican American people, from the history they have been oppressed by many people. And so the history of Chicano culture is the history of blood and oppression. My blood runs pure on the ice-caked hills of the Alaskais, on the corpse-strewn beach of Normandy, go back to Normandy, and the foreign land of Korea, and now Vietnam. So the history of Chicanos is a history of blood and oppression, as it is stated by Gonzalez. Here, there is an indication that is George Lemming describes the mixed ancestry. His home island is Barbados. Though reference to Shakespeare's play The Tempest and the Peter Hume discusses the importance this text has acquired in the post-colonial context, for there is a fundamental ambiguity in the play. When this play was written, is there any existence of colonialism? This play was written by William Shakespeare in 1608, most probably. But at that time, there was no theory of post-colonialism. So why William Shakespeare wrote this play? There is an ambiguity. It is claimed by George Lemming. And what we see, for there is a fundamental ambiguity. Prospero, the dispossessed duke who has been exiled to the with his daughter Miranda to the island, has the magical power that enable him to compel the inhabitants in this island and the spirit Ariel and the monster Caliban. Most probably you have read Tempest, is it?
Yes, sir. I have personally read the play.
Is it included in your syllabus earlier?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Okay.
It includes.
Oh, I see. Anyway, so The Tempest is written by William Shakespeare, and in brief, that means the Prospero, a duke, was exposed with his daughter to an island, and in that island, he captured a spirit. Its name is Ariel, but also a monster-like creature. Its name was Caliban. Okay, so this Caliban, Prospero went over there with the help of his magic, enslaved Caliban, and another spirit. Its name was Ariel. With the help of his magical power, Prospero became the leader of that island. In short, this was the story. In the text, it is included. When we will go in at that text in the next classes, we will be discussing more details about the Tempest. But here, George Lemming claimed that actually the Tempest, the background of Tempest is full of ambiguity, because at that time there was no incidents of colonialism, and the colonialism and the post-colonial theory was not didn't came didn't come in discussion at that time when William Shakespeare wrote this. Okay, one clue we get, actually there, Caliban, this monster, once upon a said, Prospero said to Caliban, Caliban is a human-like monster, okay, uncivilized, brute. Prospero said to him that I have taught you my language, I have made you civilized, and so you should be you should show your gratitude to me. However, Caliban, he said that this land is mine because the owner of this land was my mother Sicoras. You have snatched this land from us, so you are the usurper, Caliban said to Prospero. Not only that, Caliban wanted to rape Miranda, that means Prospero's daughter, in order to inhabit the island with more Caliban. So that was the scenario. In one time, Caliban said that you taught me your language and my profit on it is I know how to curse. And the Red Plague read you for learning me your language. It means that Prospero taught Caliban English language, but Caliban didn't take it positively. He said that I curse you for teaching me your language, but I have my own language. This is the scenario. But this is the story. However, the George Lemming claim is that the ambiguity why such kind of text was written at that time, because there was no idea of post-colonial theory at the time. But the attitude, if we study Tempest, we will see that this story and the plot is basically can be compared with the theory of post-colonialism. Peter Hilm reminds us the Prospero's magical power are not nearly so great as Caliban imagines them to be. Actually, Peter Hilm, he is a professor of University of Essex. He said that actually Prospero had the magical power, but now he is deposed duke. He was deprived by his own brother. Hume compares this state of affairs to the situation of Europe in America in the 17th century. So Prospero, what Prospero will do with the help of the magical power, Prospero ruled that island. But the question comes, why Prospero didn't use that magical power when he was the real Duke of Milan? He didn't show this. Okay, but Hume claimed that the scenario of Prospero is similar to the situation of Europeans in America in the 17th century. Why? It is topos that appears with remarkable frequency in the early English colonial narratives, as it had to the Spanish, a group of Europeans who were dependent for many years on food supplied by their native host, often willingly, sometimes under duress. So here, Peter Hume wanted to say that actually the European people, the adventurer, they spread it all over the world. They had technology, but they didn't have proper food to eat. The area, European area, that were also the area of severe cold. They wanted to live somewhere happily. They wanted to get some food to eat, to live on with that food. And for this reason, as Prospero went the island and make Caliban servant in order to survive, in the same way, Peter Hume claimed that the European power is spread it all over the world to survive. Sometimes with willingly, the people the host people. Host means that the American Aboriginal, Asian Aboriginal people, the African Aboriginal people. So Peter Hume said that sometimes the host, that means that these people living in this island, intentionally gave food to the voyagers, and sometimes for the cause of duress or the confinement. This is the scenario Peter Hume claimed. Peter Hume, he is a University of Essex, a professor of literature, film and theater. So conqueror, colonizers, guest, settlers. Conquerors, colonizers. Some people came American continent to conquer that. Some people came here to make America their colony, that is the colonizer. Some came over there as a guest, and some wanted to came America to settle there. So there is a several terminology regarding the people living in America nowadays. সবাই যে আমেরিকাতে কলোনি করার জন্য এসেছিল তা না, বিভিন্ন জনের বিভিন্ন মত ছিল। In this regard, George Fleming claimed he cannot read The Tempest without the recalling those voyages reported by Hakluyt, Richard Hakluyt. Who is that person?
স্যার তিনি একজন বিখ্যাত ইংরেজ সাহিত্যিক এবং এক্সপ্লোরার। তিনি সেই রানী এলিজাবেথের সময় উনি কবিতা লিখছিলেন, এবং ওনাকে রিচার্ড হাকলুট তখন একজন এক্সপ্লোরার ছিলেন। তখন মানে এলিজাবেথের সময় যারা খারাপ কাজ করতো তাদেরকে এক্সপ্লোরার হিসেবে পাঠায় দিত, তাদের ধন সম্পদ লুটপাট করে রানী এলিজাবেথের ভান্ডারে নিয়েছেন, তারপর শিরশ্ছেদ করে হত্যা করা হয়েছিল।
This is thank you, Zakaria, for your information. Richard Hakluyt is actually a writer. Richard Hakluyt was an English writer. He is known for promoting the English colonization of North America through his works, notably diverse voyages touching the discoveries of America and the principal navigators and voyages. This Hakluyt, actually, he is a writer, especially he writes travelogue, and he had been writing a story based on navigation, because at that time there is no airways, isn't it? So the explorer will explore the world with the help of voice. So this writer, Richard Hakluyt, he especially wrote imaginative voyages that inspired to build up a society that is called Hakluyt Society. This Hakluyt Society is a text publication society founded in 1846 and based in London, England, which publishes scholarly editions of primary records of historic voyages and travels and other geographical materials. So, with the inspiration of the writer Hakluyt and the inspiration of the Hakluyt Society, George Fleming came with his idea. He said that, George Fleming said that, I recall the history written by Hakluyt and the Hakluyt Society in relation to the Tempest. He argues that the play was also a prophetic of a political future which is our present. When Tempest was written, there was no colony by European people. So Hakluyt's story became the guidelines of the European people to establish their colony. That is claimed by George Fleming. Taught the language of the newcomers, simultaneously enslaved by them. His ancestors possessed on their ambiguity to their descendants, so that for Fleming, the circumstances of my life, both as a colonial and exiled descendant of Caliban in the 20th century, is an example of that prophecy. So the Hakluyt writing and Hakluyt Society imagined some story. That story became real shape in 20th century when all the other parts of Asia, America, and Africa and Caribbean countries were occupied by the European people. So Lemming said that the Hakluk story, prophetic story, became my present. That is, today we are enslaved by the European colonial people. Coming to the term with the past means facing the ambiguities of the plural history, both Lemming and Gonzalez draw our attention to the multifarious of their different cultural heritage. So getting the point that both Caribbean and the Chicano culture and literature, they have the multifarious culture and literary background. For the Caribbean, George Lemming, the threads is the wave run back through the Africa and the Europe. For Rodolfo Gonzalez, they run back through the Native American civilization to Europe, but extended now to consideration of the North and South. Chicanos are by definition of mixed racial origin, the possessor of dual linguistics background, English and Spanish. As Chicano literature has developed, so the question of the categorization of it has become problematic. So in case of comparative literature discussion, so Chicano literature, identity of the Chicano literature has become problematic. Although to some extent, categorization presents difficulties when we consider how to define Caribbean literature. The situation is different. Wilson Harris can be described as a Caribbean writer because his work focuses on the transformation of the power of his multicultural inheritance, while Garcia Marquez, whose work can be interestingly compared to that of Harris, who was born in Colombia, Caribbean hinterland, sees himself as a Latin American rather as a Caribbean writer. So in case of Wilson Harris, this writer can be compared with the Caribbean literature. But in case of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, that claim, because Gabriel Garcia Marquez was born in Colombia, but he himself sees himself as a Latin American. So these are Wilson Harris. Actually, Harris was a Guiana's writer. He initially wrote poetry, but subsequently became a novelist and essayist. His writing style is often said to be the abstract and densely metaphorical, and his subject matter is wide-ranging. So this is Wilson Harrison. But in case of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, he was born in Colombia, a short story writer and screenwriter, known affectionately as the Gabo or Gabito throughout the Latin American. So in case of identifying Gabriel Garcia Marquez, there is a problem that what will be the real identity of the Gabriel Garcia Marquez, though he came forward a different literary genre like magic realism. The Caribbean, as a geographical and historical entity, superimposed itself over the linguistic, ethnic, and religious difference of the people within its boundaries. As we have talked it earlier, that means in case of the Caribbean literature, they have their distinctive geographical, political, ethnic, and religious boundary, living in a different part of this world. In case of Chicano literature, it is more problematic because they live in USA. Chicano writing is outside mainstream Mexican literature, equally outside mainstream United States literature. And as Octavio Paz pointed out in the Labyrinth of Solitude, that the Chicanos neither want to return to Mexican origin nor blend into the North American society. So Octavio Paz said that the Chicano doesn't belong to the Mexican society, Mexican origin, or either their literature cannot be included to the mainstream American literature. Octavio Paz was a Mexican poet and diplomat. He, for his body of work, he was awarded the 1981 Miguel D. Cervantes Prize, the 1982 the Neustadt International Prize for Literature, and in 1990 Nobel Prize in Literature. So this is Octavio Paz. He claimed that actually the identity of Chicano literature, the Chicano people in the USA, is very much problematic because they live in the same geographical area, but they have different linguistic language, but they don't live in Mexico. They live in USA. And for this reason, the identity of Chicano literature is a little bit problematic, as stated by Octavio Paz, this Mexican writer, poet. Chicano literature can be said to have developed not out of any sense of return to anything. For this, there is no point of origin in the first place, but rather form a desire to establish the identity. Here, another issue came forward. Actually, Chicano literature came in discussion not to identify as a different entity, but they want to insert the Spanish-speaking people in USA. They wanted to establish their identity, that we speak Spanish and where our culture, our descendants are from Mexico. To speak out and have that voice heard. So this is about Chicano literature, and especially that was spreaded for the Chicano literature came in discussion after the movement, civil rights movements that happened in 1960 in the USA. Civil rights movement which empowered Black and Native Americans. But another thing is that within the movement, Chicano movement in the USA, the Black Americans, the Black people and the Native Americans came, they empowered as a different distinctive group in America. And also the university department, the Open University Department, a radio and TV station, a representation of MLA, and also the International Chicano Studies Association. However, for the movement, in 1960 movement, the Chicano literature came in discussion and they established so many issues to identify themselves as a different distinctive cultural ethnic group in USA. Actually, this movement was initiated by this person, that is Cesar Chavez, the American civil rights movement. He also came this idea of civil movement. Since the 1960s, Chicano studies has entered into the curricula, and there are now a whole variety of methods and theoretical approaches, some of which are long way removed from the beginning and the Chicano movements with its roots in working class politics. Chicano literature has also changed, moving from attempts to create a Chicano epic poem, novels depicting the deprivation suffered by the migrant worker, to more complex narrative, poetic structure. Gender issues have also come to the fore. As in the Caribbean context, there is now a Chicano literature is of growing importance. More particularly, however, there is the phenomenon of bilingualism and of bilingual poetry especially. However, Chicano literature has gained a special status in comparative literature in this way. Another poet came in discussion, that is Alurista, known for his name. He is a Chicano poet and activist. Also, he is and there is Nahatul pronunciation is a language of group, language of the Indo-Aztecan language family. And Nathaniel varieties of Nahatul are spoken in about 1.7 million Nahao peoples, most of whom live in central Mexico. This is another idea, that is the neologism. The neologism is a relatively recent in or isolated term, word or phrase that may be in the process of entering the common use. So these are the terms related to this issue. We can see a similar process of work in some Caribbean writers in 1930s. the Cuban Nicolas Gulen, for example, in his uh, collection sound poems, working with a combination of Spanish ballad, African rhythms, black dance music. We see another writer, a Caribbean writer, Alejo Carpentier, the Cuban novelist, wrote his Eco Yauma. Okay? And uh, Gulen and Carpentier wrote in Spanish. And also we see another writer, that is Francophone French-speaking writer, Amy Caesar. We will be reading Amy Caesar in our text. Like them, this is Gulen, Cuban national poet, actually he is. And he is best remembered as the national poet of Cuba. Born in Calamugue, he studied law at the University of Havana, but abandoned a legal career and worked as both typographer and journalist. And this is Carpenter, Cuban novelist and essayist and musicologist who greatly influenced Latin American literature during its famous boom period. Born in Louisiana, Switzerland, Carpentier grew up in Havana, Cuba, and despite his European birthplace, he strongly self-identified as Cuban throughout his life. He was born in Switzerland, but he himself claimed as the Cuban writer. And this is Amy Caesar, the French poet, and Amy Caesar, Our Tempest, we will be reading in this course as well. Amy Caesar was a Francophone, that means the French-speaking poet, and an Afro-Caribbean author and politician from the region of Martinique. He was one of the founders of the Negritude movements in Francophone literature. So Negritude movements, what is Negritude movements? The literary movement in 1930s, 40s, and 50s that began from the French-speaking African in Caribbean writers living in Paris. So actually, Amy Caesar came in discussion for the Negritude movements, and Negritude movements, that is the people living in France, Paris. They speak French, however, they are from other parts, African and Caribbean writers. They live in Paris and they speak French. And the protest against French colonial rule and the policy of assimilation. So the French people wanted to assimilate the African Caribbean writers with themselves. These people, Amy Caesar, he had been living in Paris. He speaks French, but he is African Caribbean. So in order to get their identity in Paris, the people got a movement that is in 1930s, 40s, and 50s decades in France, Paris. This movement is called Negritude movement. So Amy Caesar is a product of this Negritude movement. And another writer, we come Fuentes, Mexican novelist. Among his work, The Death of Armenio Glus, Arua, Terra Nostra. These are the Fuentes. We have discussed him. And also we have discussed about another writer, Nadine Gordimer, South African writer. And a Nobel Prize, she was awarded Nobel Prize in 1991 in literature. She was recognized as a woman who, through her magnificent epic writing, has, in the world of Alfred Nobel, been a very great benefit to humanity. So Nadine Gordimer also came in discussion in this way. So here we see these are all the Caribbean writer in our discussion. But she also recognized the impact of the dream of Africa, that means Nadine Gordimer, Caribbean writers upon African writers. The Caribbean Negro writers dream of a home never experienced, never seen, created modern African literature because it placed before African a new valuation of African life as a positive entity instead of negation measured against the white man's way of life. So Nadine Gordimer speaks about that the Caribbean Negro writers, they dream of a new identity by their writing. There has been a great deal of debate amongst African and the Caribbean scholar about the ideological implication of the negritude. Ole Soyinka recognizes the importance of negritude in terms of its idealistic vision of African American culture. However, there is a debate of these negritude movements. However, Ole Soyinka encouraged it. He criticized Leopold Senghor for suggesting that whilst European employ analytical thought, African are more intuitive, on the grounds that this supposition is still based on the uh, Manichaean tradition of European thoughts. So this is the claimed by Ole Soyinka. He is also a Nigerian playwright. And also Leopold Caesar Senghor was a Singalian poet, politician, and cultural theorist who, for 2 decades, served the first president of the Senegal. Ideologically an African socialist, he was the major theoretician of negritude. This person is claimed that he is the think tank of initiating negritude movements in Paris. So the comparatist is drawn into the labyrinth, for it offers an infinite wealth of altered perception and innovative connection. So after discussing the different ideological and the different scenario in comparative literature, so Susan Besnet says that actually the comparatists are in a labyrinth to get altered perception and innovation connected. A comparative literature that starts with the high canon of European culture offers preciously defined pathways, roads with markers along which the scholar can travel safely between predetermined periods, style, and literary convention. But the labyrinth offers so many more possibilities. Actually, comparative literature mm, offers several possibilities before us, and for this reason there is a labyrinth. Mm, there is there is no certain goal or path or comparative literature is still in hand now. What it does for offer the clear cut answer and definition, and for this reason we are not in a position to make the clear cut definition of comparative literature, whose context and who will be included, which literature will be included in comparative literature. In this respect, the comparative labyrinth opened by the post-colonial theories of literary production is much more in keeping with the pluralism in the postmodernist world in 1990 decades. In this regard, Susan Besnet said, when comparative literature is in a dilemma of getting a definition, proper definition or pathways, in this regard, post-colonial literature is a step forward in comparative literature. The old positivist notion of the route along with the culture's must towards progress ultimately leads nowhere. However, the positivist, that means the European positivist, and also the binary opposition that were discussed earlier in the previous classes, there was actually no way forward. In this regard, post-colonial literature gives a fresh look or fresh step forward in comparative literature. We have got another writer, that is Pablo Neruda, Chile. Uh, he is a writer from Chile, former senator of Chile, later legal name Pablo Neruda. He was the Chilean poet, diplomat, and politician who won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1971. He is Neruda. And Actually, here, Neruda, many of the voyagers of the New World, which combines lurid fantasy of the precisely defined the scientific data, actually here, the Latin America as the underdeveloped without the regard of the history of atrocities in the Europe or to the responsibility of the European is forging the chain that binds other culture. And he addresses opens with reference to many accounts of voyages in New World. So Neruda, he had claimed issue. He said here he claimed about Antonio Pigafetta. Actually, the spelling is like that. Antonio Pigafetta was a Venetian scholar and explorer. He joined the expedition of the Spacious Island led by the explorer Ferdinand Magellan under the flag of the King of Charles the First of the Spain and offered Magellan death in the Philippines and the subsequent voyage around the world. This scholar, the Florentine navigator who accompanied Magellan on the first this man make a voyage of the world and kept a meticulous long of his journey through our southern American continent, and nevertheless also seems to be an adventurous into the imagination. After getting his voice, this man, he got an idea of American continent. What is the American continent? He related that he had seen peaks with their uh, umbilicus in their backs. He has seen birds without feet. He has seen females of the species of which would brought their eggs on the backs, and the males as well as the other gannets without tongues, whose beaks look like a spoon. So after making the journey, this man, Antonio Pigafetta, he claimed that he has seen something very unnatural. He has seen some female, that means female are not giving birth children, they are they are putting eggs, just like the imaginative story claimed by this man. So that claim was also here such kind of story relating to Latin America was discarded by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Actually, this is a myth. Garcia Marquez rejects such myth making. Marquez said, no, such kind of myth making is not possible, even whilst acknowledging that the reality of Latin America is just as fantastical as the stories generates. So he said, Marquez, that such kind of myth making is not right. Actually, Latin America is just the fantastical as the stories at it generates. So stories generate Latin America as a fantastic, imaginative one. But Garcia Marquez rejects that. And nevertheless, the two writers he acknowledges as outstanding the Neruda and William Faulkner, referred to as his master. Marquez recognizes that the simultaneous need for the creation of the new writing that will reflect the new reality. So here Faulkner and Neruda we have discussed. Faulkner, American writer, Marquez has spoken about Neruda and Faulkner. Marquez is renowned for the ways in which he combines realism and fantasy in what has come to be termed magic realism. Carpentier had earlier talked about the real in the marvelous. Before Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Carpenter said a notion that is very much similar to Marquez, that is the real in the marvelous. And Borges has shown constantly how easily the boundaries between rational and anti-rational universes can be transgressed by a writer looking from a new perspectives. So also Borges speaks the same thing, just like Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Carpenter. And in his homage to Borges after his death in 1986, Octavia Paz says that Europeans were surprised at the universality of Borges, but none of them realized that this cosmopolitanism was and could only be the point of view of Latin American. So here is Borges claimed that actually the Latin America is a cosmopolitanism, cosmopolitan view of Latin America, a non-European way, both inside and outside the European tradition. The Latin America can see the West as a totality, nor with the fatally provincial vision of the French and the German and the English or the Italian. So here you see Boris, um, Argentinian storytellers. So Boris speaks about Boris. Okay. So we are at the end of our today's class. So I will not take much more. Just we will be concluding in such a way that is the post-colonial literature, comparative literature is also a voice of discovery. Only this time, instead of the European setting off in search of the research and the new islands so to conqueror, equipped with maps and charts to aid him, this voice is one towards self-awareness. So this voice of comparative literature, post-colonial comparative literature, is a voice is one towards self-awareness, towards the recognition of responsibility, guilt, complicity, collusion in the reaction of a labyrinthine world of contemporary writing. Europeans are no longer embarking on that voice from the center of the world either. So, in such a way, can be concluded that the post-colonial comparative literature is a voice of discovery, voice of self-awareness in literary area, and in this regard, they will get a new identity. Perhaps they have been redefined. The English novel, which would have sunk without trace into gentle provincial decay, has been brought back to the life by the variety of novelists writing in the English who have never been to Britain and have little and no interest is going there. George Lemming sums up that what has been happening. There is a tendency to speak of colonialism as though it were exclusively a black experience. That is a very limited understanding. It was a two-way thinking. Colonialism has been as much as white experience as a black one. So it is simply that it has taken the white world as a very long time to understand the nature of the enterprises. Comparative literature study in the 1990 decades will have to work with the recognition of colonialism and all its implication as having been indeed a two-way thinking. It means that post-colonial comparative literature is a new way thinking. Before the appearance of comparative literature, there was a one-way discussion. That means the dominant European culture, dominant European uh, literature had been discussing in this arena. But in 1990 decades, when post-colonial comparative literature came into discussion, it means that post-colonial comparative literature in this regard, the literature will be just in a two-fold ways from the dominant European culture and also from the perspectives of post-colonial culture or the African, Caribbean, and also the Chicano literature come into discussion of comparative literature. So thank you very much for attending the class. Also, it is